The phone buzzed quietly in the corner of the National Intelligence Service operations room. It was past midnight, and the walls hummed with the static of encrypted signals. A man in a gray suit, eyes heavy from weeks of surveillance, stared at the flickering waveform on his monitor. On the line were two politicians, one a rising opposition figure, the other a journalist known for her investigations into government corruption. Their words were private, casual, even emotional. But inside the NIS headquarters, those private words were being recorded, logged, and stored in silence. For years, South Korea's National Intelligence Service, the NIS, had been seen as the shield of the nation, guarding against North Korean espionage and foreign cyber threats. But behind locked doors and coded terminals, some within the agency had turned those same tools inward. What began as a counterintelligence mission to protect the state was quietly transforming into a machine of domestic surveillance, tracking political rivals, journalists, and even private citizens. It started small, one secret operation authorized under the pretext of national security. But the deeper it went, the darker it became. By 2005, whispers began circulating through Seoul's political circles. Opposition leaders claimed their phone calls were being monitored. Journalists noticed strange clicks during interviews. A few laughed it off as paranoia. Others, especially those who had reported critically on the government, began receiving anonymous warnings. Be careful what you say on the phone. Inside the NIS, the project was known by its coded name, Blackbird. Officially, it didn't exist. But within a restricted section of the Information Analysis Bureau, a team of agents managed hundreds of phone taps, covertly intercepting calls from politicians, business figures, and media executives. Their reports were compiled into confidential briefings and hand-delivered to senior officials at dawn. The intelligence didn't go to protect the nation. It went to protect power. In one such report, an analyst detailed the private meeting schedule of an opposition candidate. Another summarized a journalist's investigation into military procurement fraud. Each detail, each recording, became a weapon. But secrets like these rarely stay buried. It was a small clue that first cracked open the entire system. A technician from a telecom company discovered irregular routing signals in their network logs. The data showed multiple duplicate access points, all tracing back to one government address, an address belonging to the NIS. When he raised it internally, he was told to drop it. It's above your clearance, his manager said quietly. But the technician couldn't ignore it. He passed the information to a journalist at the Hankyor, one of South Korea's leading independent newspapers. The journalist, a man named Lee Hyun-woo, had been following rumors of government surveillance for years. When the data landed on his desk, he realized he might finally have proof. But proof against the NIS was dangerous. Reporters who had probed too deeply into national security stories often found themselves targeted by defamation lawsuits, or worse, branded as threats to state stability. Lee met with his editor in a dim basement cafe in central Seoul. He laid out the telecom data and explained what it implied. His editor frowned, tapping the paper. If this is true, he said, we're not just looking at spying. We're looking at abuse of power at the highest level. Within weeks, the first article broke. Allegations of illegal surveillance by intelligence service under investigation. The government's initial reaction was swift and dismissive. Officials called it baseless and politically motivated. But then, more reports surfaced, this time from former NIS employees who had quietly left the agency. They spoke of hidden servers, forged warrants, and years of domestic wiretaps masked under national security authorizations. One whistleblower, identified only as Mr. K, described the internal culture. We were told that surveillance of certain figures was essential for national safety. But everyone knew it wasn't about North Korea. It was about elections. As the scandal grew, public outrage erupted. Protesters gathered in downtown Seoul, waving banners that read, "Our phones are not theirs." Opposition lawmakers demanded a full investigation, and for the first time, the government agreed to open a parliamentary inquiry. Inside the NIS headquarters, fear spread through the ranks. Agents deleted files, reformatted drives, and shredded documents by the truckload. But some data was too deeply rooted to destroy. Logs of intercepted calls had been stored on a secured mainframe. one that a few investigators inside the agency secretly copied before it was wiped. When those logs were leaked, they revealed a staggering list. Journalists, human rights lawyers, members of parliament, even a few celebrities who had criticized government policies. Tens of thousands of private conversations had been recorded over nearly a decade. In one chilling excerpt, the voice of a senior government official could be heard instructing an NIS officer, "We need to know what the opposition is planning before the election. I don't care how." The public reaction was immediate and furious. Demonstrations grew larger. News outlets broadcast the audio clips nationwide. The government scrambled to contain the damage. The president at the time denied any direct involvement, but few believed the surveillance could have happened without top-level knowledge. Meanwhile, prosecutors raided the NIS offices, seizing servers and hard drives. What they found painted a grim picture of an intelligence agency that had slipped far beyond oversight. One internal memo, written in dry bureaucratic language, outlined the Political Influence Monitoring Project. Another contained instructions for intercepting priority targets based on risk factors, which included media opposition, anti-administration activism, and influence in online forums. The deeper investigators went, the more it became clear. This wasn't the work of a few rogue agents. It was a system. A former agent testified in court, his voice trembling. "We believed we were protecting our country, but we ended up spying on our own people." As trials began, the public followed every word. Several high-ranking NIS officials were indicted for abuse of power, illegal surveillance, and destruction of evidence. Some were sentenced to prison. Others resigned quietly, vanishing from public life. But even after the verdicts, many questions remained unanswered. Who had ordered the surveillance in the first place? How much of the data was shared with political offices? And what happened to the recordings that were never recovered? Years later, the scars still lingered. The NIS underwent reforms, pledging to end domestic monitoring and limit its operations strictly to foreign threats. But skepticism remained deep in the public's mind. In the quiet corners of Seoul's political community, people still lowered their voices when discussing sensitive topics. Journalists used encrypted apps, politicians changed phones monthly, and whistleblowers spoke in whispers. Because even after all the hearings, apologies, and reforms, one haunting truth remained. Surveillance once started, never truly disappears. Late one night, a young analyst in a government office opened a classified report. The document was stamped, "Restricted, internal use only." Inside were summaries of communications of interest, flagged for monitoring. The analyst hesitated, then closed the file. Outside his window, Seoul's skyline glowed, a city built on progress, freedom, and the uneasy knowledge that someone, somewhere, might still be listening. Final line. The microphones may have been turned off, but the silence they left behind still listens.